Sure.
Hey everyone. Welcome to all of you with Zoom. Hey, to the regulars. Hey, the people here, real life. It's great to have you. This is, I think we're pretty sure we're up to session 5 of Growing Big in Small Spaces. All about how to grow lots of food in little spaces. You might think, what are we doing in the great big outdoors? But just down in a second, we'll show you how to pack a lot of plants into a very small space. We're going to be in particular focusing on cuttings and propagation so that you can make lots of plants yourself. I'm here with Steve Batley, who is our permaculture expert and landscape architect. I'm Julian, the sustainability educator here. Behind the camera, we say thank you very much to Natalia. It's one of my colleagues. She's shaking her head, but it makes a big difference. And a big shout out, one more shout out to Barb Lewis, who did this for us right at the very beginning. No,
she's not here.
Pointed here, she's not actually here. But Barb Lewis, she was doing what you were doing, Natalia, before, and it made a huge difference, didn't it? It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was good. Thanks, Barb.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. I don't think she's in the audience. We are at the Randwick Sustainability Hub. We're in the community veggie garden today, which was a weed patch a few months ago. It's been transformed, literally transformed. And we have at least one member of that community garden group here today. And we'd like to say to any of you out in public, I know you're there on Zoom, but it is open every Friday morning for you to come down, get your hands dirty, put into practice some of the things you're learning here. We're going to be in that garden today. We are on Gadigal and Bidjigal land, so I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge any Indigenous participants in the audience today. Let's go.
Let's go. Let's go back a week first.
Yep.
You guys on Zoom and everyone here, what did we do last week?
Oh, so for all the new Zoom people, please, we love to have you, your input too, which means actually saying out loud, because we're not necessarily monitoring the computers. So we need to be able to hear you.
So call out.
Sorry, Steve, you might have to repeat the question.
So last week, who remembers what we did last week?
Soils.
Yes. Soils. Oh, good. We did soils last week. What do you remember about soils? What are some key things about building healthy soil?
Embody the other things in the soil. The plants and the fungi and everything together.
Uh-huh. So, yeah. Did you guys see that?
Can we stand closer?
Yeah, you can come closer. Yeah, what's a couple of the main processes in your soil system? I think you were getting at the soil is a living system. Okay, what are some of the things that you'll find in your soil? In a good soil, you hope you find in your soil.
Mycorrhizal fungi.
Yes, fungi. Something you can't see that's hopefully there. Bacteria. Other critters. So countless gazillions of other critters. Things like nematodes, which eat fungi and eat bacteria and release the energy and the nutrients into the soil. Things like worms. Yeah, worms, grubs, bugs, all sorts of things. So it's a real living ecosystem. It's a food web. What was that one?
Fungus, bacteria, and vertebrae.
Yes.
Yeah, FBI.
FBI.
Yeah.
Nice. A good way to remember it. So, and what role do plants play in the soil ecosystem?
ASIO.
Decomposers.
Yes, so they produce organic matter that decomposes by the reaction of the decomposers. Yeah, so they photosynthesize, and what does that do?
Sugars into the soil, carbohydrates.
Yep, the plants make carbohydrates, put sugars into the soil, feed the soil through their roots with sugars and carbs. What does that do?
Bacteria.
Yes, feeds the bacteria and the fungi. So it's a
No,
you go.
it's a circle.
It's a, yeah.
Yeah. I guess the really strange thing for me was that you know, we typically think of plants as taking from the soil, right? So we've got to put into the soil. But of course, we all know that plants are primary producers. They're the only things really that take energy from the sun. So of course they're putting into the soil.
Yeah,
but we don't think of it that way, I think.
No, we always think about plants taking out of the soil, but they feed the soil. So,
They say 70%.
yeah, so up to 70% of the sugars that the plant produces can be fed into the soil in the form of carbohydrates to feed the soil organisms. And then the soil organisms all work together to protect and to feed the plant. So it's a cycle, and it's something that we can encourage by. What's one of the key things about planting?
Diversity.
Thank you. What was that one?
Diversity.
Diversity. So it's probably three key things: diversity, diversity, and diversity. So if you've got lots of different types of plants in your garden, you'll have lots of different types of organisms living in the soil, and it'll be a healthier system all around. So yeah, was that, what else did we do anything else last week? It was all about soil, mainly soil. Yeah, that's good because that's important. So today we'll look at some of those plants. So because we're talking about small spaces, we want to, it's worth, I think there might be a nest up there, noisy miners, I'm guessing. So because it's a small space, you want to have a little bit of a careful think about the sort of plants that you plant to maximize your productivity. So this course is all about maximizing how much you can grow, how much you can produce in a small space. So we'll explore that a little bit. We'll have a look around the garden here, have a look at some of the different plants, and just have a think about which ones would be more suited to a small space and ones that you may want to put somewhere else or in your community garden, or find a farm or something like that to grow. But small space plants is we'll be looking at, and we're also going to do some propagation from cuttings. So there's a lot of plants that you can grow from a piece of plant. So you can get free plants. A lot of those are useful herbs and things that you can eat as well. So that's today. Shall we start? No? So we sit in the sun for a while listening to the birds? It's all right too. Okay. So why don't we, when you're thinking about plants that you're going to grow in your small space, what's some of the things that you might think about when you're choosing them? What do you want to grow and why, I guess, is the question. What's the first thing you might?
Purpose.
Purpose? What do you mean by purpose?
Well, actually, purpose would be, why are you even there to begin with? Are you creating a habitat for your environment? Are you providing plant materials to feed yourself or your family or your community? Or are you cultivating something for the farmer's market? Everything like this drives us to some sort of purpose. And that's the answer that I have for you today.
Yeah, and it's a really good one. I think, what are you trying to get out of the plants, I guess, is the point. Like, why are you doing it? And I think, is anyone interested? I think it's all about food. Is anyone not here to learn how to grow lots of food? Maybe what we can do, purpose is really important. So let's assume we want to grow as much food as we can in as small a space as possible using some of our techniques. What's something you think about when growing food? What sort of food plants would you choose and why? The ones you like to eat. Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? So, I think we looked at some catalogs last week, and there's lots of online places you can buy all sorts of amazing kind of produce, seeds to grow different things. But really, if you've got a small space, starting with the things that you actually want to eat is really makes sense, because otherwise you're going to have all these wild and wacky, wonderful, incredible plants that they just sit there and you don't eat them. So yeah, what do you want to eat? What other things might you think you might consider when choosing plants for your small space?
Pollinators.
Pollinators, yeah. So you might want some pollinators in there. Actually, we talked about guild. Did we talk about guilds? Yeah, we talked about guilds last week. So that brings us back to the guild idea. So you might have some plants in there that help with pollination. And what sort of things would they be? Yeah, sunflowers or any. Yeah. Yeah, so there's anything that attracts bees or the pollinators is worth having in the mix. The only thing I would add to that, if you're really limited with space and you've got lots of flowers, it's kind of taking up food growing space. So you want to find that balance. But what's the perfect combo between a plant that attracts insects and a plant that you can eat?
Edible flowers.
Yeah, edible flowers. So you can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have your flowers, and there are lots of flowers that you can actually eat the flower. Sunflowers produce seeds. There's little violets that you can actually eat the flower. Nasturtiums is a classic. You just eat the whole thing. So that's a really good one. So that,
Also thinking about space and time.
yes.
Size of plant and how quickly they grow.
Yep. So how much space you've got and how much room the plant actually takes. I think if you really love watermelons, maybe go to the farmers markets and buy a regeneratively grown one, because you'll have your whole balcony maybe full of watermelons. So maybe the size of the plant, it makes sense, and the space that it will take up. And I think next week we'll be looking at that in a bit more detail around how you can maximize the use of the space. Anyone else got any other ideas about plants that will be really productive in a small space and some of the thinking behind it? Pumpkins. Yeah, so I guess pumpkins, watermelons, it's interesting. I kind of just wrote them off, but where could you grow your pumpkins so they're not taking up much usable space?
On a roof.
Yeah, on a
roof. Got a shed.
Yeah, on a shed. You could probably grow them up a wall. So if you've got a shed roof or a house roof, you train your pumpkins up there, and they'll have a ball. It's sunny, it's warm. They'll just sprawl all over your shed. Don't take up any usable space. And then, like Julian was saying, what do you do once they're?
Well, pumpkins you're meant to cure in the sun. So once the vine dies off, there they are sitting in the baking sun curing. Don't have to move them anywhere.
Yeah.
Not so great for watermelons.
It's a classic permaculture, one of the permaculture principles of minimum input for maximum yield. So once it's up there, you just kind of water it, and then you harvest. Whenever you feel like a pumpkin, you just climb on your roof, get one. Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts? I'll show you one thing that I recommend when you're thinking about plants. There's some really good examples of plants around here, so we might have a bit of a wander and just have a look, and maybe we'll start with this bed here, because they've got a couple of examples. So can you recognize this? Yep. So there's a tomato. Some of them are just little bushy, but some of them climb. They're almost like climbers, and they'll just kind of keep growing and keep growing, and you can actually train them up a wall, or like your pumpkins, you could almost possibly get them up on a roof. So that's that kind of idea of using the vertical space. What I really wanted to show you with the best example is this one here. Does anyone know what that one is? Yeah, that one's silver beet. A little bit like, some people call it spinach or chard. Hey? Yeah, Swiss chard. The good thing about this plant, and a lot of plants like it, and I won't pick any because they're not my plants, but you can pick the older leaves from the outside. Just get a sharp pair of scissors and cut them right back here near the base. You might pick 2 or 3 of the older leaves, and you just leave the plant growing. And then, a week later, you've got another 3 or 5 leaves that you can pick, and then it keeps growing. And then it's basically just a constant supply of leafy greens. So if you've got, 2, 3, 5 of these silver beets, you've pretty much got a constant supply of greens from not much space at all. So it's a lot easier than, harvesting. If you grow lettuce is a really good example. as well of this kind of concept. So some people call it cut and come again, or I can't remember what else they call it. But the idea is you pick the older leaves and the plant keeps growing. These are about to go to seed. But you can imagine with these lettuces, you can get a constant supply of salad leaves for a long time, as opposed to the iceberg lettuce, the big round soccer ball one. So if this was all iceberg lettuces, we'd just be waiting and not nothing to eat, and then suddenly we've got all this food that might last a week in the fridge. Eh?
What do we do with so much food?
Yeah, what do you do with so much lettuce? You just lettuce sandwiches every day or whatever. I mean, which is fantastic. It's not a problem. But then once you've harvested it, you've got to start again and wait another couple of months to get the next lettuce. So it's kind of a slightly different way. You can get a constant supply with these loose leafed kind of loose things. Does anyone know any other plants that are like that?
Perpetual spinach.
Perpetual spinach, yeah, the silver beet lettuces, open-hearted lettuces.
Maybe the beetroot leaf.
Yeah, beetroots are it's probably my favorite in this category. I don't know if that's a beetroot or could be a rainbow chard.
Yeah, it's all rainbow chard.
Let's imagine it's a beetroot. It's pretty similar. So beetroots look a little bit like this. And beetroots are the same. You can actually eat beetroot leaves in a salad, or you can cook with them or stir fries or whatever. They're really nice, really nutty, kind of rich flavour. They're delicious. And as long as you don't take too many leaves, you need to keep a good batch of leaves there to further synthesize. So you can get a season or months of eating the leaves, and then at the end of that, you also get the beet that you can eat as well. So it's kind of the double whammy, which is really exciting. You kind of get the leafy green done.
When's the beet ready to eat? How long does it take?
It really varies. I think I don't know. Has anyone
I'm
experienced?
waiting for mine to get to 7 centimeters across. That's what it said on.
Yeah. Google reckons 7 centimeters. It
So
could.
is that months or weeks? Or? Oh, it's just weeks. Once it seems it's just be a short time.
Yeah, I would say anywhere 2 to 3 months probably to get the actual beet.
Can you see it in the leaves if it's ready?
Don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Has anyone on Zoom had that experience with beetroot?
You can actually check your seed packet, and lots of times it'll tell you how many days to harvest.
Yeah.
Okay.
And probably, I imagine different beetroot varieties are different times to harvest. So
You can sort of just scrape back the soil a bit and see the beet itself, and you decide when you want to pick it.
yeah, it's a good thing about beetroot. They actually grow right up near the top, so you can just have a quick peek. Yeah.
Yeah, Karen has a nice picture. I'll just show you.
So we have a picture.
We can actually measure it. It's beautiful.
And the thing with beetroot is if you leave it too long, it goes woody and not very tasty. So it's kind of that. I mean, you'll get it as you go along. So, but beetroot, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just had a question about diversity in the small spaces. You mentioned diversity before. And I was just wondering if, say, for example, we're planting tomatoes and we're recommended to plant them about 70, 80 centimetres apart, but we want to increase the diversity within that patch by planting other things around it. Do we then need to space out the tomatoes even more, and I'm just using tomato as an example, or would the tomato or whatever plant be happy to have more things in its growing space, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm wondering if diversity might mean we're growing less of the primary thing we want in the garden, or not in a small space. Yeah.
Julian's aching to answer this one.
I'd love to know this. It's been a burning question I've had in my mind for a long time.
Part of the reason we're out here is because these beds that we're at literally got planted yesterday by 4-year-olds. But we've got all that diversity that we're talking about here, and it's going back to the idea of guilds, isn't it? We've got this whole assembly of different plants. So we've got, the tall tomato plants here. We've got a sunflower here, which were, the intention the intention is for it to be up here. We've got beans planted around the base so they can grow up the stalk and hang on to it. Meanwhile, the tomato bushes are getting bushy and supporting each other around all this growth too. But then you can see in between, we've got, actually there's eggplant in here too, the silver beet. So these are all largish plants, but then interspersed amongst that are all the herbs like basil and parsley. And then we've also got flowering plants. And all of those will be probably lower and that continual picking type of thing as well. So we found that if you pack it in, you get a lot more out of the garden, and they often support each other. And so it's really healthy in there, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, so if you imagine all of these plants are pumping pumping carbon essentially into the soil and feeding the soil organisms, yeah, and that's how they support each other. I think.
Oh, that's great. So we don't have to space them out anymore if we want to put more in, by the sounds of it, around the bigger plants.
No.
To some, you know, not to the degree that perhaps the seed packets are saying.
Yeah.
You know, we pack
sure.
it a lot closer. Also, some things are faster than others. You know, like radishes are done and dusted in 4 weeks, so you can pull them out, and you know that space is now available for the slower plants to grow into.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of the advice generally on seed packets and with spacing, I don't know how to say this, but it's kind of it's not using this ecosystem model as an approach. It's using a monoculture model as an approach, where you dig the soil and you know, which is a very different approach, and that's why, you know, our focus here with using permaculture, we're replicating a natural system, and this, you know, this system here is a much more natural, diverse, rich system. So you'd be amazed how much you can grow in a little space.
Actually, I've just thought of an example. And you know, if you've ever let a plant go to seed and it just drops its seed, if you picture in your mind just how thick the plantings are there, and often they're the healthiest, you know, most prolific plants you'll get, the ones that are self-sown, and there's zero space between plants there.
That is what nature wants.
Yeah.
That's very true.
I planted my tomatoes pretty close together, so the ones in the middle aren't growing as big. I mean, they're healthy. So I've actually taken some out and transplanted them in the garden here today. But yeah, the ones on the outside are great.
Yeah, so we can look, and we'll explore this, I think, more next week in our planting patterns and some of the strategies for getting produce, as much produce as you can, and that stacking and the stacking over time. Yeah. Things that mature really quickly and you get a feed before everything else grows and all that stuff. So
thank you. That's great.
Cool. So yeah, the other thing. What other things are there about plant selection? Size, regular supply, speed to harvest, I guess, is another thing. So radishes, you know, if you want to be eating something in about a month, chuck in a radish seed. They're fast, and if you like eating radishes. So if you know how to make radishes taste good, send us a recipe or something.
You can also eat the leaves from the radish.
Yeah.
Okay, you can eat the leaves.
The little red ones are good.
Yeah,
Not
like
the
I'm
ones that you're here.
yeah, sure. Yeah, a nice fresh radish is something. Lots of your herbs like parsley, basil, you can just pick it and it grows. You pick it and it grows. Pick it and it grows. So that's all
We've
I've
often
got.
found in small spaces too that like shade can play a bit more of a factor than if you were, say, growing in a big open space.
Yeah, for sure. How have you managed to overcome that?
Well, we've tried to put our things in the sunniest place we can, and we're just experimenting. Not everything seems to need quite as much sun as some other things, so we've had more luck with greens and things in our sort of dappled, shady kind of areas.
Yeah, that's.
And actually here, you know, last summer, drought, bushfires, you know, searing heat here. These beds, because they're actually in the shade of this eucalypt here, plus it's a wicking bed. But really they got zero attention for probably 2 or 3 months and zero watering. But because they were in the shade, they kept growing and had a bit of water underneath. So I think, you know, Australia's pretty hot for a lot of these European type vegetables that we're growing. So actually a bit of shade in the heat of summer is probably actually really good.
Yeah, definitely some shade. And I think your trial and error approach is really good, and it's that permaculture, you know, observe and interact. So just try things, and you might be surprised things that actually grow in places you wouldn't expect them to. Yeah.
Is that rhubarb there?
No, those ones are all silver beet. Yeah, so we'll show you those. So these are slightly older silver beet, and you can see that what happens.
We've cleared away the ones that are seeded.
Yeah, so this one here is quite a good example. You can see there, it's actually starting to develop almost a trunk or a stem. So this would probably, I'm guessing this is about a year old maybe. And you know, you just keep removing the lower branches, the lower leaves and eating them, and the growth comes out of the top. I've actually been to a community garden where they had a silver beet that was about this tall. So the trunk was like all the way up here, and the leaves are up here, and they're still eating it.
Wow.
So it's amazing. So we haven't talked, or one other thing we haven't talked about is annuals versus perennials. So that's a good thing to think about. So most of these plants, your common, what you might think of as your veggies, like silver beet and lettuces, would fall in the category of being annual, what we call annual plants. So you plant the seed, it grows, it flowers, it seeds, and then it dies in a season. Then you have to generally replant it and start again. Silver beets, as far as I know, are kind of annuals, but you can prolong their life by this process. So you can get years out of a silver beet.
So if you don't get the leaves off, it will die.
Sometimes it will. Well, I don't know what the trigger is, but there'll be a flowering silver beet around here somewhere. So what they do at a certain time of year, normally spring or summer, they send up a flower, they produce seeds, and then they finish their life, typically. So another way of having a continual supply of things is maybe look at the world of perennial plants. So,
What is a perennial then?
Perennial plants are everything else.
But I mean, in the fruit or veggie garden, what is a perennial example?
An example is anything that lives for more than a season. So strawberries,
okay,
rhubarb, asparagus,
okay,
that tree is a perennial. So anything that lives for more than a season.
okay.
And sometimes the beauty of those, like there's a perennial spinach that I've seen. I don't exactly. There are some spinach, like leafy greens, that just keep growing year after year after year after year. It saves you a lot of trouble, a lot of hassle having to replant and losing the food when they go to seed. So, yeah, explore the world of perennials. I recommend.
Steve, can I just ask you, you put a lot of tomatoes in, and we're often told about nematodes, you know, being quite a negative or positive.
Yeah. Nematodes. So that in week 10, come back for week 10. We're doing pest management. So it's another few weeks away. But nematodes are a little microscopic worm, or a tiny worm that lives in the soil. There are some nematodes that eat other nematodes. There are some nematodes that eat fungi and bacteria. There are some nematodes there's some fungi that eats nematodes. There are some nematodes that are parasites, and they attach themselves to plant roots, and they take the sugars. They don't give anything back. And eventually they can destroy the plant roots, and they're the root knot nematodes. And if you've got root knot nematodes, and they can potentially destroy your tomato plants, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But if you've got an abundance of root knot nematodes, that probably means your soil is not diverse and imbalanced.
Yeah.
So we had lots of root knot nematodes through our gardens here early on, but through lots of good soil management, lots of diversity, lots of compost, they're not a problem anymore. They're still there, but all the other nematodes are eating them. So it's about that balance in the soil.
And which veggies can you use to cut the leaf, do cuttings?
Yeah, so a lot of your perennials you can do cuttings from. And so thank you. That's a great segue. So we'll move on to cuttings now. A lot of your aromatic, a lot of your herbs. I've got some here. So, wonder, how should we do this? Is this a good spot to do cuttings? Does this work?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So I just wandered through the garden and had a look for some plants that are easy to take cuttings from, or you can have success. And I tried to think about ones that you would use in a small space because they're quite productive. And this is a thing called warrigal greens, which is a native to Australia and I think New Zealand. It's called, well, they call it native spinach or New Zealand spinach, or I guess a few other things. It's quite a big plant, it'll spread, but it's really robust and really grows fast, produces a lot of these leaves that you can eat. You need to cook them.
Perennial?
Yeah, it feels like a perennial,
Yeah, okay.
but I think it grows so readily from a seed. It drops a lot of seed and it just pops. I think it's an annual technically. I don't know, but it's once you've got it, you'll never not have it. We kind of almost pull it out like a weed, but it's a food. It's something you can eat. I had some the other week. You have to cook it
because it's got like spinach oxalate.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see on the camera or if you guys can see here. It's got. If you look up close, it's a bit shiny and a little bit crystally on the leaves. Sorry. I don't know whether that will.
Let's see if I see.
Yeah. So you do need to cook it. It can irritate your mouth and your throat and things. I had a big feed of this last week. It was really quite nice, even though I completely stuffed up the recipe and put completely the wrong thing in. What was it? Tahini instead of tamari. It still worked, just but totally different. But it was good. But I did get a slight sort of tingling feeling afterwards. I think that, you know, I did boil it and stuff, but it was fine. It was completely fine. So this could work, and it looks like the sort of thing to me that would grow from a cutting. So we might put that.
You need that big?
No, this is just a big chunker. So we might use. I might use this as a demonstration. We'll see how it goes. There's some more. Not an edible, but anyone know what this is? Lavender. Yeah, lavender. So maybe not, you know, it could be quite useful in a small space. For what? Yeah, pollinators, attract the bees. And I think in the first week we were talking about your site analysis and your sector analysis and wind. You know, wind can really affect a lot of your plants. These make really good wind breaks. So if you wanted to use them, and they're really robust and really tough in hot, dry conditions, and they grow really easily from a cutting. This one is lemon balm. Yeah, so it's really nice lemony kind of flavor and smell. That would grow. I think that would probably grow if I just threw that down there. Well, I don't know. It looks like it. I think I just made that one up. Does anyone recognise this? Yeah. So this is a good one for really, if you happen to have a hot, dry position in your small space. A lot of your aromatic kind of Mediterranean type herbs will grow in those conditions. So if you want something that you just put in and almost ignore, and it's a hot spot, this one will do it. This one will grow from a cutting. It will also grow from, it's a ground cover and it spreads, and as it grows, the branches, when it hits the ground, it throws down new roots. So you can grow from a cutting, or you can just pull up a piece that's already got roots in it and put it in the ground. So that's really, really, really easy to grow. So that will just grow, put that in a pot and off you go. So I won't do a cutting from that because that's probably the easiest. Mint is awesome. You've got to have mint. You know, it's especially in summer.
Can you leave the plants in the sun?
In the sun?
Yeah.
Sure.
In the sun?
That's it.
Oh no, just for the zoomers so you can see it. I might start with this guy because that's a really nice little. So mint. So most of the cuttings you'd take from perennials, annuals you wouldn't take cuttings from. You'd grow them from seed. Perennials, cuttings. I'm just going to go and grab some soil. So in the first or second or third week, we did seed planting. Do you remember what we made? We made some seed raising mix. Remember what we made it out of? Yeah. Yep. So we used some of this stuff, which is coconut fiber, or coconut husk, or coir. And we use this because it holds a lot of moisture. So we mix some of that. You could use some sand. This is called propagating sand. This is river sand. So the sand, what does the sand do? Yep, sand helps with drainage, and the coconut holds on to moisture. So the mix for seeds is pretty much the same as the mix that you would make for taking cuttings, which is roughly about half sand, half coconut. Or you could also use perlite or vermiculite or something that helps with drainage. So this one we prepared earlier.
So you don't need extra perlite. You can just have those two.
Yeah, so 50% this,
Yeah.
roughly, and 50% some sort of drain. Yeah.
You don't add any soil.
You don't really need to add, don't add garden soil. You don't really need to add nutrients at this stage. You could. So you could also put in a handful of worm castings. We don't necessarily need it. And then we'll do our pot first. So you just get your pot, something about this size. For cuttings, you want a pot with a little bit of depth. So you wouldn't use your egg cartons or your little shallow ones because you just don't have enough depth to put your cutting in. So something about that deep-ish, about 10 centimeters. Fill it up. Do the old taparoonie, just to knock a little bit of air out, but don't squash it down with your hand. And that's ready for putting our cuttings in. A pot this size, you could put about 4 or 5 cuttings into there. So how do we prepare our cutting? We get the secateurs, and you get, yes, you know what, I'm going to show you with this. So you find a piece of the material of the plant that you want to take cutting material from. If it's not your plant, be careful and look after whoever the plant that you're taking it from. Don't just steal people's plants. Ask them if you know them. If you don't know them, ask them as well. But we got a piece of this lavender from over there. Now we'll do a thing called soft tip cutting. Actually, I'll show you one version of it on this. And it's a thing called a heel cutting. So you can see we've got the main branch here, and we've got all these little side shoots. So I'm going to choose this one. It's about 10 centimeters. And I'm going to pull it down and break it from the side of the thing. Now, I don't know if you guys can see the very base of that cutting. There's a little bit of the main branch still hanging off it. It's called it's what we might call a heel. I didn't get a very good heel on this one, but it's what we call a heel cutting. So that heel, the benefit of doing this technique is there's a lot of growth cells in that point, so that you got a really good chance of roots growing out of there. So this is called a heel cutting. The next thing we want to do with our piece of soft, this is called a soft tip heel cutting. So the tip of the plant, and it's soft, is take off a lot of these leaves.
Oh, you want the soft parts?
Yeah, so there's different ways of doing it. You can do hardwood cuttings. This is called a soft tip cutting.
Okay.
So there's lots of techniques, but this is one of them that you often have quite success. Now they've got a lot of leaves here. These leaves have little holes in them, and air and for exchanging gases. Water vapor comes out of these holes in the leaves when the plant's doing its planting thing. and it sucks water up through the roots and they come out the leaves. That's how plants work, partly. So if a plant doesn't have any roots, and we've got a lot of real estate, leaf surface, it wants to pump out water, but it's not coming in the bottom, so it'll fail. So you want to take off a lot of those leaves. So we're reducing the amount of water that's leaving the cutting. Now you notice when I'm pulling the leaves off, I'm pulling them upwards. Why do you think I'm doing that?
You don't damage the...
Yeah, if I pull it down like that, chances are it'll rip a piece of the bark off or the stem, and that's where diseases can get in, it will fail. So if you've got fingernails, you can just pinch them out. If you've got a decent pair of secateurs, you can chop them off. And you keep going, keep going, keep going, till I would leave just a little tuft of leaves up the top. So it'll look something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, the blue sky background works well to give contrast.
Okay, so that's a heel cutting. So you'd make about 5 of those, and then get your pot. And because this is reasonably robust, I'm just going to push it straight in. But before I do that, I want you to have a look, and this might be hard to see. And I'll show you guys in a little while. So as you look along the stem, there's little knobbly bits where the leaves are coming out. Yep, little knobbly bits, they're called nodes. The nodes are where the action is. That's where the growth cells are. So that's where the roots are going to come out of. So we want to have maybe 3 or 4 nodes in the ground, and you got more chance of the roots coming out there or in the soil. So when I'm pushing this guy in, I'll make sure there are at least 3 or 4 nodes in the soil. I don't want to push it so far down that it's close to the bottom. You don't want it much deeper than halfway down the pot. So pop that in. That's one cutting. Do that another 4 or 5 times in one pot. Space them out. One there, one there, one there, one there. Because they're not all going to strike. No one gets 100% strike rate. So once you've done that, give them a water and cross your fingers.
How long does it take?
It really varies how long it takes. So it depends on the season. So this time of year, it should be fairly, maybe a month or 2. In the cooler, and this is probably a really good time to take the soft tip cuttings when the growth is happening. So you know, how do you know it's not working or it hasn't worked?
It gets brown.
It goes brown and sort of crackly. It's probably a sign. As long as there's green, there's hope. So sometimes they'll sit there, green, nothing much is happening, nothing's happening, but it's still green. Probably something going on under the ground. You only really know. Oh, the other thing that can happen is it can actually start to grow. So sometimes it starts growing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's grown roots. So you can think it's growing and then you take it out and it's still just a stick. So the best way, how do you think the best way to tell your plant or your striking has worked?
Check for roots underneath.
Yeah, have a look at these holes. If you see the roots coming out the bottom, then you've had success.
And can you just leave it outside?
Yes, yeah, it could take a few months. Where would you put it?
I think it's too harsh to leave it outside or not. I mean, mine's died outside.
Yeah, so if we left this guy here in the sun, or there in the sun, probably wouldn't work because there's too much pressure on yeah. So you'd want it, we could leave it over there in the shade, as long as it's warm. So it's like our seeds, yeah. So if you want it in a nice warm, but not full sun, not sunny spot, how much water do you give it? Just a little bit, yeah. So you want to, the first time you want to water that hole, make sure the soil is completely wet, let it drain out, and then just keep an eye on it and make sure it stays moist but not wet. It's one of those things.
Yeah,
right?
but you water it every day.
Yeah, well, it depends. So, yeah, and different plants, different water. Lavender doesn't like a lot of water, so sometimes you're better off less water for lavender, and your Mediterranean herbs more water for things like mint. So it's a trial and error thing. It's an observe and interact kind of thing. But keep it moist. Don't let it dry out completely because it will probably die. But don't soak it because it'll rot somewhere in between. There's no actual recipe for that. It's just I don't know what it is. It's just a feel. You get a feel for it. So you can make lots. I would only put one type of plant in each pot. So you wouldn't have a pot with lavender, mint, oregano, warrigal greens in it. Why not? Even though it's diversity, isn't that a good thing? Yeah.
Just one maybe.
Yeah.
They need different amounts of water and different sun.
Yeah, they might need different conditions, and maybe the lavender will start to grow roots a month before the warrigal greens. So they're out of sync, and when you take them out of their pots, you got some issues there. So I'll just quickly demonstrate how I would prepare something like this. I would go like that. Fairly brutal. You can see the nodes. Node. I would cut just below the node in this case, because this is different to the heel cutting where we pulled it off. This is just the end bit. If you cut through just below that node, chop those bits off, there's a pretty good chance you get roots growing out of that. And you put it in, oops. With this one, it's quite soft and a bit bendy, so I would use you can go to the nursery and buy a dibber, I think they're called. A dibbler stick. Or you could bend down and pick up a stick. Sorry to all the nurseries out there. I'm sure if you want to do it properly, go and buy a dibbler. Otherwise, you can use a stick. And you want two, maybe 3 nodes. But if we push it down 3 nodes, what's the story? It's too deep, isn't it? So I would only go 2 nodes in this case, or get a bigger pot, maybe even 1 node. Just firm it in a little bit. And again, warm spot, bit of water. I think this guy would be more forgiving with overwatering. They seem to respond quite well to a fair bit of water. So don't be afraid to give this guy a fair bit of water. You can even sit it in a dish, a little tray. So there's a little bit of water all the way down the bottom, so soak it up. Warrigal greens. All right. And yeah, etc. Same process for pretty much any of your plants, taking soft tip cuttings.
Do you do it as flowers too?
So a lot of your flowers are annuals, so you would grow them from seed. There is a rule or a theory, a principle that you don't take cuttings from plants that are currently flowering. But I don't know, give it a try, see how it goes. Does anyone on Zoom have any questions about any of that?
No, that was all good.
Sounds all good?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, great, excellent. Okay, so we'll okay. So what we'll do with the Zoomers, you guys, we've got about 10 minutes for you guys. We'll do a round robin. There's only 6 of you, so we should be able to. You get a little bit of time. Share with us one thing. So we talked about different types of plants. We chatted about the way to plant them and cuttings. Just share with us maybe one thing you remember, one thing that's stuck from the last 45 minutes. And Julian will probably call your name.
Francis, you're looking ready to go.
About the nodes, like how far down in the soil and the size of the container. I didn't know that, so that's really useful.
Cool, thank you.
It's good.
Go for it, Tarani.
For me, I think the amount of veggies that you can plant in a small space was a surprise. Thank you for that.
Catherine, are you able to? Then followed by Gloria.
Yes, I'm curious about, we propagate in our community garden with perlite, with our stem cutting propagation, to maintain a sterile environment as we can to provide, to eliminate as much bacteria and fungus, you know, in the cuttings itself. That I find very helpful, but sometimes you have to make those preparations in advance when you're actually doing propagation. My question was this has gone back and forth for me regarding taking a stem cutting. Just say the mint that we were talking about is making sure you have enough nodes there to have enough photosynthesis to be able to set the roots in motion. Is to scar the bottom of the stem to activate the bottom of the stem to provoke enough rooting, give a greater chance to root at the bottom, because the plant wants to heal itself.
Yep. So I'll demonstrate that. That's something that you can do as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we've talked about cutting the bottom of the stem just below the node. So what you can also do is just make a bit of a wound, take a bit of the stem off, just the bottom centimeter or so, and that can encourage where that wound is. That can encourage roots to grow from there as well. And I know Matt, some of you guys did our gardening on the wild side course. We did propagating native plants, and that was something that the guys at the council nursery did. They did that wounding of the base of the cutting. So yeah, thank you for that. That's good.
That's from Gloria, who's coming in from San Diego each week.
Awesome. It's great to get some global sharing of knowledge. Thank you.
Okay.
Actually, while we're on that, the other thing that we haven't done or mentioned is you can buy a powder or a liquid which is called rooting hormone, and it's something that stimulates root growth as well. So you just dip the end of your cutting in that rooting hormone and then put it into the ground.
It's the same chemical that the plants produce to stimulate growth. Julian, followed by Kim. Okay, maybe Kim. We've got three knitters. Okay.
They're out there taking cuttings.
My favourite was that you could put so much in a small space.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, is that we're wrapping up with the Zoom people?
I think we're done. Yeah, unless there's anything else. Any other questions?
I'd like to add something. May I add something here? I think that was really useful with the young folks' garden, their 4x4 plots, was that they were smart enough, or they had enough guidance to put that sunflower in the center to create also a habitat for pollinators and bees to come in to assist with that, with those plants. Also, too, it creates a shade environment as well as a area where those plants can be supported by.
Yes.
Very good. So, bravo to those young folks.
Yeah, it was a nice morning of planting. So yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you, Steve, and we'll see you next week for transplanting. And as usual, I'll send a feedback form out pretty much straight after this. So thank you very much, and please register for next week. Bye.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.